Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar on e-cigarettes today. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Zohal. I'm a staff attorney here at the Public Health Law Center. So before we proceed any further, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the history of the land that the Public Health Law Center sits on in St. Paul, Minnesota. Those are the tribal and treaty homelands of the Dakota Oyate people who are part of the larger Sioux Nation. We also acknowledge the regional territory of the Ojibwe, also known as the Chippewa and Anishinaabe people. And we acknowledge the ancestral connection of the Ho-Chunk Nation to that region. If you're not familiar with our work, the Public Health Law Center is a national nonprofit that works to reduce and eliminate the use of commercial tobacco, promote healthy food, support physical activity, tackle climate change, and address other causes of chronic disease. Our campus is based in St. Paul, Minnesota at the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law. As far as what we do, we provide legal technical assistance, including help with legal research, assistance with policy development, and may also provide litigation support, such as by filing amicus or friend of the court briefs in high impact cases. We develop publications that explain complex public health and policy issues and run trainings on commercial tobacco control topics. It's important to note that we do not provide direct representation and we do not lobby. And when we say commercial tobacco, we're not referring to the traditional use of tobacco by Indigenous communities. Tobacco has been used by many American Indian communities for spiritual and healing purposes for thousands of years. So what we're tackling specifically is commercial tobacco, which excludes traditional use. It's also important to note that all of our work at the center is grounded in health equity. We're committed to removing all institutional barriers and applying an equity lens to our work to produce the best results for the communities that we serve. It's important to remember that people are situated differently, so the same policy approach will impact different groups in different ways. And regarding equity, it's important to keep in mind the different social determinants of health. There are many factors that can affect people's health, which should be considered when thinking about policy proposals. So for instance, imposing monetary penalties on an individual struggling economically will contribute negatively to the social determinants and lead to adverse health outcomes. And without further ado, let's move on to our topic for today. So electronic cigarettes, also known as e-cigarettes and vapes, are both hazardous and electronic waste. Many e-cigarettes contain lithium batteries that are prone to explosions and fires when disposed of improperly. They leach microplastics and toxins, including highly concentrated amounts of liquid nicotine or e-juice. And nicotine is considered an acute hazardous waste that was once used as a pesticide in the US until it was banned because of its impact on bee populations. E-cigarettes also contain heavy metals and nickel and lead, which can contaminate the ground and water, and they've been falsely marketed as disposable by the tobacco industry, but they are not. Safely disposing of them and trying to recycle their parts is extremely difficult, and the average user is severely underinformed about that fact. They should not be thrown into the regular trash or recycling. The lithium batteries cannot be removed, especially in the newer models of these products, making disposable more challenging. They may end up in the trash and as litter on the street or flushed down a school toilet by underage users. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First up, we have Maria Jensen. Maria started her career in environmental health and safety in the e-waste recycling industry after graduating with a master's in global health with research related to mercury contamination from electronic waste. Now she does education and advocacy work around e-waste management in Minnesota with RECA, the Recycling Electronics for Climate Action. And after Maria, we'll have Hudson Kingston. Hudson is the legal director at CURE, where he works on energy policy in rural areas, holding agencies accountable for their duties under environmental and transparency laws and working in coalitions to protect forests from industrialization and overexploitation. Hudson has also worked on litigation and policy related to climate change through the course of his career, water pollution, impacts of mining, pesticide regulation, and the environmental and health impacts of e-cigarettes, public records, and government transparency. So without, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Maria.
Thank you. I'm just going to start off with this photo while I introduce the topic before I jump right into talking about the unique challenges of e-cigarettes in our waste stream. I want to give a zoomed out summary of the waste stream that it belongs to, which is e-waste or electronic waste. E-waste makes up about 1.5% of the material that ends up in our landfills today, but it accounts for almost 70% of our global toxic waste stream. We have been mismanaging our electronic waste since the very beginning. Reactionary policies and government bodies that have been slow to act and squeamish about going up against industry have allowed our electronic waste stream to wreak havoc in all sorts of ways, polluting our air, soil, and water, exacerbating environmental racism and global health inequalities, and costing all of us tons of tax dollars to clean up after externalities caused by products that have made huge profits. This photo is from Uganda, which is a common global dumping ground for e-waste. Thankfully, in recent years, exportation bans and industry certifications have cut down on the global e-waste dumping, although it still happens today. Unfortunately, domestically here in the US, we still have not figured out proper e-waste management. We only collect about 15% of our electronic waste for recycling, which leaves the rest of it to end up in improper waste streams. The environmental injustice of poor e-waste management did not stop with a decrease in exportation. A prime local example here in Minnesota are the electronics that end up being burned in a trash incinerator in North Minneapolis, where asthma rates are 6 times higher than the state average. Communities living close to landfills also suffer, as 80% of our state's landfills have leaking issues, allowing the toxins to leach into crop soil, groundwater, and eventually the Mississippi River. Batteries from electronic devices are the #1 cause of fires within our waste management industry. To get an idea of how big this issue is around the country, try Googling fire at recycling center or landfill fire like I did for this screenshot. You will find dozens of results spanning no more than a week. Open up a few of these articles and you will find they often report that the fire was started by a lithium-ion battery. And likely enough, it is not because they found evidence in the smoldering remains, but that nowadays it is a safe assumption that the waste industry makes. If you're like me and you would like more statistically significant data, the National Waste and Recycling Industry Association reports that the waste handling industry, which includes haulers, transfer stations, material recovery facilities, and landfill operators, lose 3% of their infrastructure every year to these fires. The frequency of these fires is increasing every year, and insurance rates for waste handlers are increasing at over 10% per year. I got this slide from a president of a local solid waste management company here in Minnesota, and he told me that lithium-ion batteries could single-handedly cripple the waste industry, leaving us with a huge waste crisis and no one to manage it. This was a $20 million transfer station in Blaine, Minnesota, that burned down in 2018. Fires like these are caused when consumers mistakenly throw out a battery or a device containing a battery, and it ends up in a single stream recycling facility or a transfer station. This trailer was purchased by St. Louis County, Minnesota, Environmental Services just a few weeks before it caught on fire. The same county had a fire at their transfer station a few years earlier that cost them $500,000. Landfill administrators report that spot fires occur every few days, caused by batteries. And as we saw in Rice County, Minnesota, at the end of May this year, those spot fires are not always successfully contained. On May 22nd, a fire started in the Rice County landfill that grew to the size of a football field and burned 30 feet deep. And it took almost a week to put out this fire. Meanwhile, it poisoned the air, water, and crops for miles. In an attempt to quantify the impact of air pollution from landfill fires, A study was conducted after one large such fire occurred in Poland. It was found that 6.5 million people were exposed to measurably higher levels of particulate matter from that fire. There were 79 such fires in the country of only 30 million people that year. A 2021 study by the EPA was found that of all the materials recovery facilities that they interviewed, 22% reported having experienced an injury from a battery fire. So I'd like to dig into what types of batteries are causing these fires and what devices those batteries come from. Lithium-ion batteries, such as those in your laptops and phones, are highly reactive. And if punctured, they often react thermally. They can start a fire in the surrounding waste very quickly. Unfortunately, our waste and recycling material is routinely bent, dropped, and crushed, which is the perfect environment to start a battery fire. Each e-cigarette or vape has one of these lithium-ion batteries that love to cause fires. The vapes in this picture are all disposable, meaning that when the battery dies, the device is at its end of life. No charging port is provided. You might think this is odd because lithium-ion batteries are rechargeable. And I agree, it is very odd. When people toss these devices away, they're disposing of a rechargeable battery that has been used one time. This new disposable vape craze causes confusion for consumers as well, who are used to throwing away their single-use batteries in the garbage. The other issue with these devices is that the battery is fully encased in plastic, along with a lethal dose of nicotine, meaning traditional e-waste recyclers don't want anything to do with them. Today, the only end-of-life process available for these devices is hazardous waste incineration. I'd like to show you what happens when a lithium-ion battery or a device containing a lithium-ion battery ends up in the trash. Luckily, this happened at a transfer station during business hours, so they were able to respond to it quickly, but you can see how dangerous this situation is for the workers. That being said, they react extremely quickly, and part of the reason for that is because they're all highly trained, and this is basically just a normal Tuesday for them. These fires are occurring so frequently these days. Oops. Devices like e-cigarettes that have embedded lithium-ion batteries not only cause problems when they're disposed of incorrectly. This photo is from an electronics recycling facility in Tennessee, which is typically the place where you would want your battery to go. Unfortunately, these facilities cannot keep up with the rate of change in our e-waste stream, and their triage processes are getting more and more complicated as an increase in items with embedded lithium-ion batteries are becoming ubiquitous. To try to illustrate why these items are so problematic for the typical e-waste recycler, I'd like to show a video of how typical e-waste is recycled.
Every year globally, we generate 20 to 50 million tons of the toner before we shred them. And as a big pile, what is all this? This is our e-waste that's ready for shredding. We brought it over here and we wanted to go through the material and make sure there's none of those items that we cannot shred, such as LCD TVs, glass screen TVs, or batteries. So the next step, of course, is the shredder. Let's go take a look. At this point, we've sorted all the material, and that pile of material, we bring it over here for our mechanical separation. Our first shredder does all the cutting, the heavy lifting of the operation. From there, you're going to have two separate lines. One handles ferrous materials, such as steel or anything with iron content, and the other line is going to handle things that are non-ferrous, such as aluminum, copper, plastic, and any other things you may find in electronics.
Music.
Every year global.
The music kills me. But as you can see, the e-waste is triaged and sorted, and the best attempts to remove anything containing batteries is made. If an item with a lithium-ion battery ends up in the shredder, there's a good chance that that whole facility could be lost. Small items with embedded batteries, like these e-cigarettes, can easily get mixed up within the e-waste stream and accidentally end up in a shredder. These machines are processing thousands of pounds every day, and it only takes one battery to cause a catastrophic event. This is not to say that lithium-ion batteries are not recyclable, but it is the design of these devices that causes them not to have a circular end of life. Design challenges are a huge issue for circularity of devices. Unfortunately, producers of electronic devices are able to move much faster than the recycling industry. Each year, and at an increasing speed, new devices are appearing in the e-waste stream, and the waste and recycling industries simply cannot keep up. Embedded batteries in devices such as e-cigarettes are just one of the many examples of a non-circular design. So I'd like to finish up here with a quote from a website that sells disposable vapes. Disposable vapes are an increasingly popular way to vape because they are convenient, portable, deliver great flavors, and offer satisfying performance. There are no buttons to push, coils to swap, or tanks to fill. With that, I will hand it off to Hudson.
All right, Maria, thank you. That was appropriately horrifying, and I always love watching your presentations for that reason. I'm going to start my screen share now, and I'm going to make my presentation big. All right, so my presentation segment is called Rural America and Lithium-Ion Batteries, a Burning Issue, pardon the pun. But first I should say, my name is Hudson Kingston. I know some of you folks from back when I did work at Public Health Law Center, but currently I work for this great organization called CURE. CURE is a rural environmental organization focusing on energy democracy and community resilience. We really believe in protecting rural environments with the people that live there and for the people that live there. So we're very into the whole democracy part of being environmentalists. Also, CURE is just CURE now. So I like to call it the nonprofit formerly known as Clean Up the River Environment, which will make sense to you if you are in Minnesota. So I am here to talk about the environmental law and reality side of things, to go after Maria's very chilling examples of how dangerous these things are. As folks probably have heard before from the Public Health Law Center, electronic cigarettes are hazardous waste. So the electronic part of them is toxic, flammable, and reactive, which are all things that can make something a hazardous waste. And often it can also be corrosive, which is the fourth test. So it can check every box to be a hazardous waste. Nicotine itself is also listed specially, as Zohal said, as a hazardous waste, and always has been, as long as EPA has had these rules. So if these things are disposed of by a business or basically anyone that's not a household, it has to be cradle to grave tracked through our hazardous waste system, which I will call RCRA. If you want to ask the question what RCRA stands for, I can answer it at the end, but who cares, right? It's just the acronym RCRA. And this applies if a vape shop wants to throw away a bunch of e-cigarettes, or it also applies if a school wants to. So both of those are not households. And as unfair as it may be, the federal system applies to the waste generated by these non-household users. But when the federal law was adopted, they also included a loophole, which is called household hazardous waste. And as you may guess, that means that things that are generated by households that are exactly the same waste are not regulated as hazardous waste by the federal government. Instead, it falls on states and other local units of government to figure out what to do with them. And that's where we are here. So most states have some sort of system that's similar or somehow based on the federal system for normal hazardous waste. But because it's up to the states, your results may vary. So in California and Colorado, e-cigarettes pretty clearly are hazardous waste and have to be brought to a hazardous waste facility for disposal. In Minnesota, the nicotine is very clearly a hazardous waste, but there was guidance out from the state regulators saying that the batteries were no big deal. Who cares about the batteries? After Maria's presentation, I think we can all agree that I care about the batteries, and maybe you do too. But their official guidance was that the nicotine was a big deal, but not the batteries. Just throw those in the normal trash. And in North Dakota, the official guidance is to just dump your e-cigarettes into kitty litter and forget about it, quite literally. So the absence of uniform federal standards means that you, depending on what state you're in, you may have guidance that is, I think, in my opinion, slightly unsafe, all the way down to no guidance at all, no idea where to bring the stuff, and potentially putting people in a dangerous situation when they encounter e-cigarette products that they themselves didn't buy and don't know what they are. And if anyone thinks I was ragging on kitty litter or on North Dakota for the kitty litter thing, this is a screenshot of their official guidance, and I did circle in red the official suggestion that you put your nicotine products into kitty litter and throw it in the normal trash. And to North Dakota's credit, they have a guidance document, right? Many states don't even have that. So they are trying, but they're also taking something that is, as Maria said, it's lethal in small amounts and suggesting that people absorb it into kitty litter. I don't know how much they intend for you to use, but I hope it's a lot. So I work for an organization that cares a lot about rural places. This is a uniquely difficult problem for rural governments and rural people. So in the absence of uniform standards, it's difficult for rural jurisdictions with limited resources to gain either the knowledge or the resources they need to actually deal with collecting, shipping, and disposing of this waste legally. So for example, where I live, I have to drive more than 80 miles to go to a household hazardous waste disposal site, and it is only open on Wednesday afternoons. I have not actually made it there yet. I'm designing my Thanksgiving plans around going to the hazardous waste facility because I think I can make it there on Wednesday afternoon, finally. And because collection is so difficult, the odds of incorrect disposal is made much worse. Where I live, as I go jogging down the highways, which I do frequently, don't ask me why, e-cigarette waste is frequently on the side of the roads. It's just thrown out like a cigarette butt or what have you. And, you know, as much as it disgusts me to see that, I understand that the person who's throwing it out doesn't realize how dangerous it is, nor do they realize the danger or the danger they're causing to their own community. It can be consumed by wildlife. It can be crushed easily by a passing truck. And it can cause wildfires, which I think is very, very salient for rural communities right now. So these are just some examples of the garbage that I see in my community. I don't take pictures of every single one of these things I pick up, but I certainly have a lot more photos somewhere. And this is just my highway or the road in Lake County that has a big old mower still sitting at it. Anecdotally, you know, it's not clear, as Maria was saying, it's not clear whether a fire is caused by an e-cigarette or a different kind of lithium-ion battery, but we do know anecdotally that at least in Jefferson County, Colorado, someone was working for the county and mowing in a park, and their e-cigarette exploded in their pocket and caused a wildfire. So it's happened, and Jefferson County has since prohibited the use of e-cigarettes in their parks. But I mean, the person who caused that fire did so accidentally and wasn't actually using the product when it happened. And then obviously the photo of this giant mower is to illustrate the fact that it isn't just inside waste facilities where these things can be crushed. This lovely little tractor is a e-cigarette crushing machine. So it easily could start a grass fire or even a forest fire if it happened at the wrong time in the wrong season on a windy day. And this is just some stock photos. I didn't actually take these photos myself, but these are some stock photos of what we're trying to avoid in rural spaces. And our viewers from California were the ones who first told me how important this was to them. So this is for you, friends. I also want to say this is an intractable problem in rural areas, but it's even more so a problem in Indian country. So tribes have a uniquely difficult relationship with this stuff because they're already facing an opioid and nicotine commercial tobacco that is epidemic that has been sapping their resources for decades. Tribes are not given full authority to take on state authority under RCRA, under our hazardous waste laws. So they have to abide by the state standards in many respects while still managing their own waste systems. And they can get some grants and technical assistance from EPA in order to do better with their waste systems, but it's still not enough. Some tribes in Alaska, for example, aren't even subject to federal standards, and they have open dumping of dangerous waste that could either be burned or left out for polar bears to eat. It's not a good situation, and as a result, I think there's been a lot of thinking among tribes about these issues that have a lot of others could learn from. I do think there's also the point that tribes often hazardous waste, at least in Minnesota and other places, is managed at the county level. Tribes don't always have great relationships with the counties that they coexist with, and they aren't allocated sufficient resources from those counties. So the counties have to deal with giant rural landscapes, and they have to find places to put their facilities. They often don't put them in tribal communities because they often are favoring higher population centers and places like that. So it's just a difficult situation, especially when tribes are being given the problem, but none of the authority over the solution. And due to the stark situation, and maybe just, also going along with it, tribes have been, in my opinion, the leaders in solving this type of problem. So, for example, back in 2019, right before the pandemic, the Public Health Law Center was tracking states and tribes doing something about the e-cigarettes that were causing people's lungs to literally stop working. And at that point in time, both the Turtle Mountain Tribe and the Lac Courte Oreilles Tribe both permanently banned the sales of e-cigarettes on their reservations. So they had the authority to do a sales restriction. They didn't do it halfway. They didn't do it temporarily. They banned e-cigarette sales on their reservation lands. And that, I would say, although it was done to respond to the current public health emergency that we were going through in 2019, this policy had a much larger implications for the issues that Maria was just talking about. By prohibiting the sale of small electronics with lithium-ion batteries, the tribes can work to eliminate this dangerous e-waste from their garbage collection system. So they're saving themselves a lot of money in terms of public health harms, but they're also de-risking their whole waste system and lowering the possibility of those catastrophic fires that are going to happen either inside the facilities they themselves own or out on the landscape where nobody wants an uncontrolled wildfire either. And the question is, we have these examples in the states of Wisconsin and South Dakota. Would other rural government units be willing to go as far as banning these e-cigarette sales or even all e-waste that lead to these dangerous fires if they realize the hazardous waste emergency that is being caused by these products? And also, they realize that their costs are very high for managing hazardous waste, but the solution that I think these tribes prove is possible is just taking the problem out of the system. And so I hope that I haven't gone way over my time. My parting thoughts are just that environmentalists, the waste industry and its regulators, and public health have a common cause here in preventing the pollution, the fires, and also addiction. I don't have to tell you all about that last part, but by working with non-traditional partners like environmentalists in the waste industry, public health professionals may be able to get more than they even thought possible within the normal commercial tobacco product licensing system. Broad sales prohibitions may be especially appropriate in under-resourced rural settings where disposable e-cigarettes continues to increase the risk of fire and toxic contamination. So I would just say that this seems to be a policy that works. It's not necessarily for everyone, but especially if you have resource restriction or resource constraints, it seems like a really good one. And I'm just gonna end with a fundraising appeal, because this is Give to the Max Day in Minnesota. And if anyone felt like giving money to cure a rural environmental nonprofit, I would not mind. So if you're not in Minnesota, you don't know what Give to the Max Day is, but we have a website, givemn.org. And yeah, Don't give me any money if you don't want to, but I'd love to answer any questions that people have. And here's Zohal.
Thank you, Hudson. I'll just go ahead and share my screen here again. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about addressing the responsibility and policy solutions to this issue. So in terms of addressing the issue of e-cigarettes, recognizing the harm caused and the risk posed is the first step, right? And then comes the question of responsibility. So figuring out who is responsible for the problem, the people that end up having to deal with it, like schools and waste facilities, may not be the ones responsible. And e-cigarette manufacturers provide little to no instructions on how to properly dispose of the devices, as we just heard. So consumers are either littering them or throwing them in the regular trash or recycling. And it's especially a problem for schools, where a large amount of them are confiscated from adolescents. And just, there we go. And in terms of policy options, so the most efficient policies are those that directly address the source of the problem, what we call upstream policies and solutions. And they regulate how much e-cigarette waste comes into existence in the first place. So how many e-cigarettes are generated. And these policies regulate how manufacturers generate and dispose of waste and hold manufacturers or distributors responsible legally and or financially for the disposal of such products. Other regulations may limit where and how e-cigarettes are sold, and passing and enforcing these laws does require time and effort. So they can be more difficult to bring about, but they're effective in greatly reducing the amount of e-cigarettes in circulation in the first place. We also have midstream policy options, and those can help address the amount of waste that is already in existence. So midstream and downstream solutions can help it address that kind of waste. Midstream solutions work to capture e-cigarette waste before it becomes litter, and downstream solutions focus on harm mitigation and cleanup of existing waste. So one type of upstream solution that can be especially helpful is the prohibition of sales of single-use or disposable e-cigarettes, like Hudson just mentioned, has been instituted by some tribes, and limiting where tobacco products in general can be sold. There was a proposed bill in terms of states in New York in 2020, and it's been reintroduced since, which would have banned single-use vapes. So that refers to vapes that can't be recharged after they run out, as we heard, and it would have also banned single-use cigarette filters, and would have applied to wholesalers of tobacco products. That bill did not progress. California had a number of localities introduce similar ordinances, and there was a proposed statewide bill there last year as well, which included steep penalties for violators and explicitly included distributors as prohibited from selling these products, and that bill also did not progress. Instituting prohibitions on flavored e-cigarettes is another way to limit the amount of e-cigarettes ending up into the waste stream in the first place. And these are actually already banned by the FDA. And technically, any new e-cigarette products are supposed to go through FDA's pre-market review process and receive a marketing granting order before they can be sold in the US. So technically, most e-cigarettes right now, whether flavored or not, are illegal because they have not received the pre-market approval by the FDA. So right now, there's about 23, I believe, e-cigarettes, all of which are tobacco flavored, that have been approved by the FDA. And the FDA has tried to crack down on some of these legal products being on the market. It's banned imports of some popular black market products. You may have heard of Elf Bar, for instance, and Escobar, and it sent warnings to nearly 200 retailers selling them. So jurisdictions that are choosing to enact bans on single-use and flavored products are acting consistently with the public health framework that the FDA has put out. Extended producer responsibility policies, or EPRs, you might have heard of these as well, and they're another potential solution. They require product manufacturers to take responsibility for the entire life cycle of a product, so from production to collection of used products and disposal or recycling. In the US, these laws, there are several states already have these laws. I believe about 24 states have laws, but they apply to products including paint, batteries, carpets, electronics, and the like. and not e-cigarettes. And so they can be adapted to apply to things like plastics and other disposable products like e-cigarettes. They can also focus on requiring manufacturers to reduce the amount of disposables they use, known as origination restrictions, or pay a fee for the amount of disposables used in packaging, and then be responsible for the disposal and recycling of those materials. And the one caveat with EPRs is that they must be written comprehensively. You can't allow the tobacco industry to write their own laws or monitor themselves when it comes to EPR. So the legislation needs to include clear requirements for the industry to implement disposal plans and state who has oversight and enforcement responsibility. And then one important note is that the most comprehensive and effective waste management system can be achieved through collaborative management of waste, where you have, for instance, the manufacturers being held responsible through an EPR, but they're also working with local government and the waste facility and environmental and public health officials. So in terms of downstream solutions, once this e-cigarettes have already entered the waste stream, they have to be dealt with in a very specific manner. And again, they can't be thrown into the regular trash or recycling, cannot emphasize that enough. So you need a mechanism of collection. And because of the youth vaping epidemic, as I mentioned before, schools have kind of become a ground zero for that collection aspect. And so for instance, in Boulder County in Colorado, that school district collected over 3,500 e-cigarettes from its schools just in 1 year, just to demonstrate the volume that we're seeing. Monroe County in New York collected over 226 pounds of e-cigarette waste, which is equivalent to thousands and thousands of e-cigarettes. Putnam County in New York, which is a more rural county, estimated over 90 pounds of vapes confiscated from its schools in a year. So these are massive quantities that we're seeing. And as a result, they've had to implement waste disposal programs and have to come up with solutions themselves. So in Boulder, the school staff is provided with a clear plastic battery container with a fill line, sticker, gloves, a hazardous waste label, and sealable bags for leaking products, because these cartridges are prone to leakage. And as we heard, nicotine liquid is very highly toxic. And Boulder County's actually expanded the program to retailers. Monroe County in New York has adopted a vape recycling program in partnership with their local waste management facility called Eco Park. On the left there is the types of devices that they accept. And the county schools also submit special containers with vapes that they have confiscated from students to the facility, which then disposes of them. And disposal consists of partnering with a hazardous waste company, which incinerates the batteries. So, disposal usually involves incineration. And this program can serve as a model for how counties around the country can partner with local waste and recycling entities to find ways to dispose of e-cigarettes. In Putnam County, I think I saw a question about what kind of containers can be used. So there's a local nonprofit there called Prevention Council that has led the charge in installing vape disposal boxes in various locations, including the town hall, police department, and they're working on getting them into schools. The boxes have to be located in temperature controlled environments, so they can't just be exposed to the elements to minimize the risk of battery explosions, and they have to be emptied out every 6 months and taken to the hazardous waste facility. So some states around the country, also including Wisconsin and New York, are accepting e-cigarettes through medication takebacks in conjunction with the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, but those take-back programs do not accept lithium batteries. Another policy option is to list nicotine as a hazardous material, requiring increased transparency and data sharing at the state or local level. Hazmat laws exempt finished consumer products or smaller amounts of hazardous products, but a locality could designate nicotine-containing consumer products as hazmat. And this approach is beneficial because it would require clear disclosure of how much hazmat is on site. So there could be fines imposed for failing to comply, and facilities would be required to get a certificate of compliance annually. And having a sign outside a vape shop warning of an inhalation hazard and the hazardous waste aspect of these products might impact consumer behavior and how they perceive these products. When it comes to getting e-cigarette manufacturers to take responsibility, I think I saw a question about that in the chat as well. It's not easy. Litigation can be an option. And there's 2 lawsuits right now that kind of demonstrate a method to try and hold tobacco manufacturers accountable. So first is Baltimore v. Philip Morris. This one does not have to do with e-cigarettes. It's specifically about cigarette butt waste. But in this lawsuit, the city is trying to hold the tobacco industry accountable for the cost of cleaning up the cigarette butt waste, which is polluting their water and their air and their soil. And the city has asked for the tobacco companies to pay the costs of that cleanup, which amounts to millions of dollars. And that's a pending lawsuit, so there's no outcome yet. And New York City is also suing 4 e-cigarette distributors for illegal sales of flavored products. They've already banned flavored e-cigarettes, and these distributors continue to sell them. But part of the lawsuit also addresses how these illegal sales have created a cumbersome hazardous waste problem for the city, forcing it to develop disposal methods in line with hazardous waste regulations, which are very costly. And the city is actually also partnering with a hazardous waste company that once these confiscated devices are collected, they are then taken to a hazardous waste management facility in another state. I believe it's in Arkansas, and taken apart, and the batteries are incinerated. So in theory, through litigation, states and localities could seek to recover the cost of having to dispose of lithium batteries and associated risks such as battery fires and the risk to waste management employees. And another incredibly important point, when localities are considering how to implement solutions for this issue, it's important to keep in mind environmental justice principles. Maria mentioned at the beginning, environmental racism and disproportionate impact. It's important to look at that, which communities are already most impacted by pollution and disposal efforts. So waste facilities are often concentrated in communities that have been historically marginalized, including communities of color, immigrant communities, and lower socioeconomic status communities. So systemic racism has shaped urban planning and development and disproportionately inflicted the burden of environmental pollution onto these communities. And Hudson touched on rural and remote communities being unduly impacted, especially on or near tribal lands. And an interesting statistic is 79% of municipal waste incinerators, for instance, are located near these communities, and so are the majority of landfills and burn facilities. So communities located near incinerators experience higher emissions of harmful particulate matter and other toxic substances such as mercury and lead. And these emissions can lead to higher rates of respiratory illness and disease, as well as cardiovascular disease. Landfill leaching contaminates waterways and recreational areas in these communities. And waste and litter issues are already more likely to impact communities struggling with these problems, which compound physical and mental health issues in those communities as well. And illegal dumping is more common in these areas too. So it's incredibly important when figuring out how to implement an e-cigarette disposal and collection system to assess the impact that it's going to have on the community in which a waste facility might be permitted, for instance. So environmental impact assessments looking at these issues are not only incredibly helpful, but a necessity when it comes to this problem. And that's all I have for you all today. So thank you for joining us, and we'll move on to questions.
Okay, is someone going to read off questions, or should we just go nuts? I have one flagged that I'd like to answer. I can read it off.
Go for it.
Okay. So we have a question. We have been struggling for years not having a place to dispose of these devices. Some drug take-back locations will accept devices with removable batteries, but not disposable devices. Our local hazardous waste sites would also not accept these, so our schools had nowhere to take them. Where can we direct schools looking to dispose of these devices? I do think that Zohal did a great job of covering that while this question was also being typed, but just to reiterate something that I said, so schools must comply with RCRA, a federal law. And so the reason that local takebacks might not want to take the stuff from the school is that the school actually has to pay. They have to pay a hazardous waste company to come to the school and pick up the stuff they've confiscated from kids. I know that that's not great to tell a public health person or a school principal, but that's the only safe way to deal with this stuff. It's very unsafe, and schools are going to be collecting large amounts of it. And if it's brought, as household hazardous waste to a household hazardous waste center, that just passes the cost along to the county or to a business that's contracted with the county. So I think that it's important to tell schools that they should work with their environmental and waste regulators in their part of your state to figure out a responsible hazardous waste company to take it from the school, and then that's going to cost a lot of money. I think it's up to public health to figure out how to get that money. So as Zohal was saying, lawsuits are one way to get retailers to pay up, but also it could be part of a licensing fee. The school's cost should not be borne by the schools in this case. It's certainly not their fault. So the licensing fee should cover all costs of what the retailers are doing in their community, and that could include hazardous waste fees for the school.
I go on to another question.
Yep.
Fine. There is a question about, is there anything that can be done towards ending the manufacture of lithium ion batteries? And I guess I'm not going to answer that question directly because it's not lithium ion batteries necessarily that are the problem. Like I mentioned, those are actually pretty highly recyclable. You can get about 90% of most of the materials out of them through a proper recycling of that chemistry of battery. But it's really the design of certain types of devices that make them not circular. So there's definitely, like, legislatively, you could ban embedded lithium ion batteries, would be wildly helpful to their circularity. If the battery is not embedded, it automatically makes it a typical e-waste that can be sent to a recycler, and they'll pop out the battery, and the battery will go to one type of recycler and the rest of the device will go to another. But the problem with these e-cigarettes is that almost all of them are encased in plastic, and so it can't be removed safely because you can't smash the plastic open, you'll cause a fire. So, and then the other issue too of the nicotine being encased with the battery. That nicotine is a different type of waste, and it's hazardous waste, and it's not going to be going to those e-waste recyclers. So yeah, bans on embedded lithium ion batteries would be very helpful, and also just bans on certain devices, like the disposable vapes are just a very irresponsible use of those devices. If you know anything about, cobalt and lithium mining, it's not a pretty process, and we shouldn't be wasting those materials. So requiring manufacturers to make their vapes rechargeable would expand their lifespan and decrease how much consumption is happening. And then also requiring them to make the battery removable. Those two things would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, and to agree with Maria, so the question was, how can we stop them from being manufactured? The way to stop them from being manufactured is forbid them from being sold. Most of these things are being made in China. China doesn't allow the sale of many of these products in China, so they regulate the sale of these products. And this is nothing against the great country of China, but they are exploiting a lack of regulation in the United States. So if we banned their sale, people would stop making them. And that's really the only power we have on international trade where we live. We have a lot of good questions now.
Did answer the top one.
Go ahead.
About EPR, I didn't finish reading the questions, but yeah, I can say some basic information about the bill that we're working on. It's an update. Oh, did you want to answer that one, Hudson?
No, I'm just
okay.
getting it flagged for you.
I saw you
You're
flagged
answering
it.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, it's an update to the bill that was written in 2007. As Zohal mentioned, there's 25 states in the U.S. that have some sort of stewardship program for e-waste, and none of these so far, as far as I'm aware, include e-cigarettes yet or batteries. And they include like a small list of devices, which is basically summed up as TVs and computers and tablets. So it's a pretty small subsection of the e-waste stream. So even though it's called electronic waste EPR, it's really not the whole waste stream. So that's what RECA is trying to do, is update that program so that it's applicable to the whole waste stream, so that manufacturers, basically how it would work is manufacturers have to register with the state pollution control agency, and then they pay the costs that are incurred by collecting all of the recyclable e-waste based on their market share in the state. So that's how it would work, and it's really going from paying for the collection of about 20 million pounds to the full e-waste stream, which is an estimated 133 million pounds in the state.
Excellent answer.
I can jump in and switch gears quickly for some of these questions about schools and vape disposal boxes. So Pam, thank you for sharing that. That's terrible and terrifying. They definitely shouldn't be sending the vapes home with students for disposal. One of the things I think is important in terms of that is the facilitation and making it a safe environment for students to feel comfortable disposing of those vapes. So that, first of all, like Hudson said, that involves the school being willing to pay the cost of disposal with a hazardous waste company. Putnam County in New York, and there's also another county in New Jersey that's doing the same thing. Their vape disposal boxes that are installed in schools come with a amnesty policy. So, they're encouraging the schools to adopt this policy of, if you see a student depositing the vape into the device, that student does not get in trouble for doing so. So sort of facilitating that culture of focusing on responsible disposal and not on punitive measures. And then Amy asked about purchasing vape disposal boxes. So the disposal boxes that I had a picture up of in Putnam County, their county is partnering with a private company, I believe it's called Inmar, that provides the boxes. But again, it's county funded. And some of that in terms of collaborative waste management requires in a lot of instances, we've seen nonprofits sort of doing the legwork, including in Monroe County in New York, of sort of approaching the waste facility and getting them to recognize this as an issue, and then encouraging them and to address it. So in Monroe County, the American Lung Association was the one that recognized the issue and brought it to their local waste facility, Eco Park, and diligently encouraged them to take up the cause until that program was established. So.
I'd like to answer this question from Rob, which is beyond incineration, are there any other innovative ways being explored to deal with them? Which there have been some e-waste recyclers that have tried to figure out a way to recycle them. And the ones that I've spoken to said that they gave up because they're not equipped to handle the hazardous, the nicotine that's in there. I don't know if it's hazardous medical waste, or that's not my waste stream, so I don't know a lot about it, but it's not the type of waste that they're used to dealing with. And kind of just in general with the e-waste waste stream, for the things that fall out of what a typical recycler can handle, they could spend millions of dollars trying to figure out how to recycle that device. But the thing is, they have to make their money back. And so if that device is out on the market for 3 years and then it disappears, right, which frequently happens, things come and go, and the rate of innovation is so much quicker than how fast the recyclers can respond to that, and how much risk they have to incur in order to try to respond to certain waste streams. So really, it's a matter of funding mostly, and who's paying for it. And we really can't ask the recyclers to figure out how to do that, because they just simply don't have. These are not billion-dollar companies. These are usually pretty small locations, and they don't have the funds to respond to every single item that enters the market.
I also, to follow on that, here in Minnesota, I had heard that one other option was they would send the e-cigarettes to Canada to be shredded and then landfilled under a blanket of inert gas. So basically, it's a careful form of landfilling that costs more money. But as Maria and Zohal both said, the most likely end of even a properly disposed of e-cigarette is that it is burned in Alabama or Utah in a environmental justice community next to some poor people. And that's just the best that you can do with these products right now. And then Maria's presentation covers what else happens to them.
Not that that's a good, it's the best because the other options are so horrid, right?
These products,
A landfill and fire
should not exist. They shouldn't exist. They're horrible.
Yeah. A landfill and fire is really uncontrolled pollution and can, you know, as we saw from the study in Poland, can pollute millions of people.
Yeah, regarding Ron's question, that's exactly the kind of invasive and like punitive measures that can be problematic. There's he's talking about vape detectors, and there's a lot of school districts that have installed like bathroom sensors to detect vaping. You know, these are punitive measures that kind of encourage students to hide what they're doing and flush them down the toilet. And I forget what state it was in. I think it might have been Minnesota, but there was recently, I think, or was it New York, an explosion or from a clogged toilet that was clogged by vape. So that's definitely not something, you know, that can just compound the issue. So non-punitive measures, vape disposal boxes can help address that.
I will say in response to Katie's question, I do think it's the case that when pods were less popular, there's been an explosion, if you will forgive me for saying that word, in these disposable vapes. And as Maria said, there's always a new kind. There's always a new kind. Up here where I live, they are the Max or the Loons. I don't know if that's intentionally a Minnesota branding thing, or if everyone's vapes Loons across the country. But yes, they're all not really legal under federal law because they haven't received any authorization from FDA, and yet they're still being sold, and they've come on really strong in the last few years. They already existed as products, but now they're the go-to product for almost everyone. And a prohibition on disposable vapes would, you know, in theory, still allow people who wanted to refill and take care of their own big, expensive vape. They would still have that opportunity potentially. But yeah, these disposable vapes have become very popular, and even though they are not legal, they haven't been blocked from entry to the country, unfortunately. Okay, apparently Loon is a Minnesota company, so more's the pity. They certainly leave a lot of garbage in my neighborhood.
Just in response to Anna Maria's comment too, I agree. You know, the cost definitely shouldn't be on, you know, individual companies or individuals, but I would argue whoever's making a profit off of these devices, right? So the manufacturers and retailers, if there is going to be some sort of EPR or funding the collection, it should be the folks who are making a profit that are paying for this. And also we should be able to say no to certain types of devices. If we agree as a society that this is something that's damaging for our health and our communities, then we should be able to say no.
Okay, great. I think that's the perfect note to leave off on. Thank you again, Hudson and Maria, and thank you everyone for joining us today. You can find out more about Public Health Law Center at our website. Please check it out. We have a ton of resources on there and other webinars. So thank you and have a good afternoon.